Well, I think so far Walmart's been able to absorb a lot of the pricing, and the question is how long can they do that and whether they actually should. As the cost of goods go up in any other way or any other model, the costs are mitigated and they're passed through, and I think that's something we need to start thinking about. You heard the previous guest talk about how his company was mitigating costs and doing things that they need to do to deal with it, and I think you'll see Walmart start to do that soon as well.
Politically, Jimmy, do you think a letter from Walmart, which is the biggest retailer in the United States, comprises about 10% of U.S. retail, actually moves the needle for Ambassador Lighthizer and the Trump administration when it comes to thinking about going forward with these tariffs?
I don't think so. If I was a business, I would certainly not plan on these tariffs being lifted anytime soon. That at the last minute there's going to be a deal, so China buys more sorghum and soybeans and the tariffs are going to go away. My expectation, I think this is not 100% probability, obviously, but I think a reasonable possibility that these tariffs are going to be in place in some form or another for years between the United States and China. And if the idea is to mitigate and absorb prices, that doesn't to me sound like a long-term strategy if you're a business. That's going to have to be passed along to the consumer.
Bill, what do you make of Walmart coming out to say how significant this impact is going to be? Telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth, or do they have any ulterior motives here?
Well, I think both, to be quite honest with you. You know, the impact that, the Christmas light example, that'll probably cost 30 cents on a string of Christmas lights. So it's not as if it's a consumer disaster in that context. But Walmart's position is a little more complicated. Not only are they an importer of great extent, but they're also an exporter, or their retail business in China is an importer of U.S. goods. So any retaliatory tariff that's happening in China is sort of hitting them, coming and going. And then the complications of dealing, an American company dealing and operating in China requires a very close relationship with the Chinese government, and I can't imagine that this tariff war is making those relationships with the Chinese government any easier for Walmart. So this is probably a little more complicated for them than it is for other retailers. But I do agree with the position that the prices have to be passed through eventually, and I think most retailers are starting to make plans to do that. And in fact, for the tariffs to have any effect at all, the consumer has to feel it and change their buying behaviors so that then retailers and manufacturers would change.
Right. I mean, the Wilbur Ross. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to point out, Jimmy, that Walmart is one of thousands of U.S. companies that filed comment and letter to the trade representative over the summer before these tariffs went through to talk about how they would impact their business. On one hand, U.S. businesses for years have complained about not getting the right access to China, about not getting preferential treatment because of the competition with local companies and intellectual property theft. And on the other, they're going after the U.S. for tariffs. So how do you square those two things if they want fairer terms of trade with China?
Well, I think there's some doubt. One, whether the tariffs are the most effective way to get those better terms. And I think now there's concern that these tariffs are not a tactic, but they're a longer-term strategy to force companies to reposition their supply chains. I believe that's what the administration is saying, that, all it would take is 3 months and those supply chains can be shifted around to other countries or back to the United States. So I think when you begin to look at the longer term prospects, it begins to look like a very, very different business environment, not just for the short term, but for the coming years.